Hi friends, it's Lauren Taylor. Thanks for joining me in my craft room today for a Fandom Friday video. It's also a new release from Kindred Stamps, so I wanted to show you the adorable Friendly Spirit stamp set that I'm going to be working with today. There are 4 ghosts and 2 humans. One of the humans is the human version of that little friendly ghost, so I'm really excited to stamp these out in color. Today I'm going to focus on how I colored my ghosts. So I have my 2 people here, or 2 kids, stamped with black ink, and then I'm stamping my ghosts with a lavender purple ink. I will change my mind on my friendly ghost at the bottom right hand corner. I'm going to stamp him again in black later on, but these are the Sassy Club inks that I used for my stamping today. They are alcohol marker friendly. So I'm going to zoom in here on one of my ghosts, and I'm going to be using Olo alcohol markers today. I'm using BVs. They are blue violets, and I think they match the lavender ink quite well and give my ghosts a little bit more of a, blue spirit ghost-like feel. So I started with BV 2.3 and I added some shadow, and then I'm bringing in BV 2.2. Looking back, I don't really like the kind of variation or the way it lightens between these 3 colors. They are the same, hue, and like it's going through the different shades, but I felt like it was just too big of a jump in between all the colors. So I'm doing this combination. You can see how it looks, but I'm going to come back and I'm going to bring in 2.3 and 2.2 again and do a little bit of tip to tip blending, picking up some of that darker color with my lighter color and then trying to get a better blend. I felt like it just kind of, I don't know, went from the dark to the medium tone a little better. Now I went a little heavy handed and I colored him in a lot with the 2.2. I wish I would have not gone so crazy with the 2.2, but that's okay. I'm going to repeat this process, but this time do a little bit more tip to tip blending as I color. So I'm bringing in that darkest shade 2.3 and adding that in, and then I will do the tip to tip blending to try and make a better blend between the 2.3 and 2.2. So I'm coloring them in, I'm letting the color fade out from the marker, and then picking up more ink as needed to finish coloring in that mid-tone. Then I'll bring in the lightest color and fill in the rest of the ghost. And I'm much more happy with how his body turned out than his face, but I still think it looks good, and we're going to keep going with him. After I'm done coloring in his ghost-like area, I'm going to color in his mouth. So I'm going to bring back in that darkest color, 2.3, and color the inside of his mouth. And then I was looking at movie stills from this movie, and their tongues are still red. So I'm using R 0.1 and 0.2 to color in his tongue. And I'll repeat that process for my other 2 uncle ghosts. I did bring in a light yellow color for the teeth. I did notice that they were kind of off-white in the movie still, so I did bring in a very pale yellow. For my friendly nephew ghost here, I wanted to do more of a white light blue color, and it just didn't work well with the lavender, so I changed my mind and went with black ink instead. And I'm using 2.2, B 2.2 and B 2.0 to color him in, and then I'm going to bring in my 0. So similar to how I colored in my other ghosts, I started with adding the darkest color, and then I'm doing a tip to tip blend between what is going to be my darkest color and my mid-tone to color in the rest of the ghost, and then I brought in 0 to be like my lightest tone just to blend that out. He is very white in the movie, so I wanted it to give that same feel but have this light blue be, the shadow of my ghost. So I misspoke. I thought for some reason I had 2.2, but all my coloring is just the tip to tip blending, the 2.2 to 2.0, and then my 2.0 being the mid-tone. But I guess the 2.2 was too dark. I'm remembering now, I made this card much earlier than doing voiceover, so apologies there. But I then again use that 0 to finish coloring in the rest of the ghost. I'll use the darkest 2.2 to fill in the inside of his mouth, and then again bring in those red colors to color in the tongue. 0.1 and a little darker with the 0.2. I did bring in 0.1 again just to give him some softer pink cheeks, and then I colored in my two kids. I'm going to use my scan and cut to cut out my images, and here is how they look after being cut out. So I have my three uncle ghosts. I love that they're like a little softer, they feel more like a ghost. And then I have my friendly ghost, him as a human, and then our main girl from the movie. So today I'm just going to be using the humans and my friendly ghost on this card. I wanted to make my own flip card. I made it once. It turned out a little wonky, but I'm going to make it better this time. So I'm taking a full sheet of blue paper and I cut it in half. So it's 4¼ by 11 inches. And then about, I would say, a third of the way, no, a quarter of the way, I'm going to add the center of my circle. So I didn't really do a very good job measuring at this point, but I want the center of my circle to be at about 2⅛ of an inch. And that is so I can get this circle to look centered at 5½ So if you want to use your ruler and use the 5½, halfway point for your card to be as a guide to have your circle in the center, but right now I'm just kind of winging it. I don't know looking back, why I didn't do a better specific job, but it turns out quite perfectly. So I guess we're winging it and it worked out. So I am going to then line up. So that line that I did in the middle of my circle, I was trying to create a line so I knew where to line up my magic mat under the die because I only want to die cut the left half of my circle. So I'm running that through my Sizzix machine that's just off camera on the side there. And I again die cut it so it just cut half of the circle. So the left half, this is the front of the card. I'm going to grab my scoring tool and I'm going to score where the circle didn't cut through on the top and bottom, and that's going to be the first half of my front flap of the card. Next, I'm going to set the card to make sure that my second score line will be hidden behind the circle flap. So I'm just using as a guide. Again, I'm really just winging this. There are lots of dies out there if you don't like to wing things that will make this for you. But I wanted to make sure that second score line would be hidden. The fold would be hidden behind the left side of my card and that you wouldn't see the score line in that whole opening on the left. That's where I made my mistake the first time around. And then with the whole card flat, I cut it down to 5½ inches so it will fit in an envelope. So when folded and kept flat, it is an A2 standard card. So now I wanted to add in a little bit of pattern paper and ink blending. I chose a piece of pattern paper from Kindred Stamps Celestial Paper Pack. I don't know, it was giving magical vibes, so I'm going to use one of those. And then I grabbed some distress inks. I'm starting with chipped sapphire and I'm adding that to the bottom of my card. I'm making sure to also do both sides of my circle since that part is going to flip over. It's a little, flip card. I used a piece of masking tape just so I didn't have to add ink where I didn't need it. And then I'm going through and just making sure that it looks even all the way across of that chipped sapphire. After that, I'm going to darken it up a little more with black soot. So I'm going to again do both sides of the circle and then I will make sure it goes all the way across the bottom of the card, just darkening it a little. I just wanted to give something a little more oomph to my card since I wasn't going to be adding a bunch of pattern paper to each area of the flip card. I still wanted to give it some interest and, color variation. I will also add some watercolor a little later on. Should have done it now, but I'll think about it later and I will have to mask my pattern paper, but I'll show you how I did that when I get there. I'm using my Card Basics die. So I used the largest circle earlier with the kind of stitching detail to create the flap of my card. And I used the next size down, a smaller solid circle to die cut my pattern paper. So I'm going to glue one of those circles to the front of the flap the center of my card. So just adding it to the center, it gives a little bit of a border of that blue around the pattern paper. And then I'm going to repeat that for the other side of my circle. So adding glue to the back side of my paper. I'm going to open my card and add that to the front, which also covered my pencil mark that I made earlier. After that, I have like the flip part of the card done. I do want to add something to, I'm having fun as you can see. I do want to add something to the back or like the inside of the card. I thought of doing more pattern paper, so I'm just trying to figure out if I want more of that star to peek out. And I thought, you know what, it's fine. Let's just cut some circles, and that way I can add, a bit of text on the inside, so a sentiment I can write on the inside of the card. So I use the largest stitch circle. Again, this is the one that I use to create the flip part of the card out of the pattern paper, and I'm going to glue it to the inside of the card. So I want it to be hidden by the flip part, so I'm trying to line it up and then I pressed it down so that way when the card is closed you don't see that circle. It hides behind the flap, and just gives it, a little bit of hidden mystery to the card. Before I glue the white cardstock circle that I die cut using the solid smaller circle from the die set, I want to stamp a sentiment on there. I'm going to go with "You Can Keep Me Forever." I'm making sure I don't want it on the front before I stamp it. So I'm just going to lay out my card, try to see how I want my card to go. And I will say one thing, if I could change about this stamp set, is that I wish that the ghost and the human child version of the ghost were facing the same direction. What I had originally in my head before I started working on this card was I wanted the ghost and the boy to be on the flip part. So it would change from ghost to human when you open the card, and the girl would just be on the inside of the card as well. But since they're different directions, we're just going to adapt. It's okay. And I'm going to add the ghost to the front of the card and then the two human kids on the inside of the card. Now, this is where I realized I wanted to add splatter. So I actually used some of my 4-inch mint tape and I die cut the circles out of it so that way I could use mask over my pattern paper to be able to splatter on some of my starry colors. I'm using the blue gold of all of the metallics. Added some water and grabbed my paintbrush, and I'm just going to splatter all over the card. I'm using masking to just not splatter where I don't need to. It's not going to be at any point the front of the card. But I wanted to make sure I got splatter on that little circle as well as part of the flip mechanism. So once I was done splattering, I removed all my masking tape and I was able to finish off adding that to the card. I love mint tape. I use it for anything and everything, so it's nice that I can make a little quick mask out of it as well. So now that that is going to finish up drying, I'm going to stamp my sentiment. So I'm grabbing my circle and placing it inside of my MISTI. I have my sentiment towards the top, trying to get it looking as centered as possible. And I'm going to use some VersaFine in Onyx black ink to stamp that sentiment. So I'll go ahead and get that done. I don't have any dies for this stamp set. That's why I use my Scan and Cut to cut out the images. So I'm going to stamp a second sentiment and do a little fussy cutting in just a moment. I decided to go with the sentiment, "It doesn't get much friendlier than you." I thought that was so cute for the front. So I'm going to emboss that on some blue cardstock in just a moment. So I get my first sentiment, well, it will be my second part of my sentiment on the inside of the card, just adding that to the center of that circle, trying to make sure it looks even, and of course it will be hidden in a surprise when you open the card. So I'll go ahead and also get my two characters glued to the inside of the card. They're ready to go. I want them to be the part of the scene where they're at, dancing together, kind of floating off the ground. So I'm just going to attach them without any type of grounding, just right onto that circle. So I'm going to glue my little boy on the left, making sure that he stays on the circle, doesn't extend past the edge in any way. And then I will go ahead and glue on my girl right next to him, just to the right. Before moving on to the front of the card, I'm going to grab my white gel pen and just add some highlights now that I have my images in place. I'm also using it to color anywhere where I went outside of the line, but just adding some dots to their cheeks, some details to their hair and clothes, just giving it much more of a cartoon look. So now I'm going to work on the front, which includes an embossed sentiment. So I have some more blue cardstock, and I'm going to use my embossing ink to stamp that sentiment. And I have some detail white embossing powder from Ink on 3 that I'm going to be using today. So I'm going to go ahead and pour that onto my inked sentiment. Make sure there's good coverage, that there's plenty of powder. And I'll go ahead and put the rest of the powder away while my heat gun warms up. And then I use the heat gun to melt that powder down for my sentiment. Once it's cooled down, I'm using just a Swiffer cloth to pick up the excess anti-static powder that I added before I stamped. And then I wanted to add the similar blue inks like I did for the rest of my card. So I'm grabbing again Chip Sapphire and Black Soot Distress inks. I'm adding the dark blue first, and then I just use a towel to wipe off the ink. This is like an emboss resist technique where you just wipe off the ink off of the embossed sentiment. So it gets dark with the ink on top, but because it's like a plastic powder basically on the card that I've melted down, you can easily wipe off the ink off of the embossed sentiment. I'm going to fussy cut out my sentiment like I said earlier, just going around giving it a bit of a bubble cut, and then once I'm done I'll be able to attach everything to the front of the card. I decided to pop up my ghost and my sentiment, so I'm going to grab some thinner foam adhesive. This is 1mm thick 1/8 of an inch strips from scrapbook.com. They are black. I figured I would use black since the background is a bit darker. And I'll go ahead and fill in the back of my sentiment. I'm going to use my ghost as a guide to where I will place my sentiment at the bottom of the circle, and I'll go ahead and press that into place. And then I'll add foam adhesive behind my friendly ghost as well and attach him to the front of the card, center of the circle as well. With that, that will finish off my card. So let's have a little look. We can see here the front, my ghost, it doesn't get much friendlier than you. And then when you open it, it flips over and he becomes a human boy with his, little friend here. And the sentiment on the inside says, "You can keep me forever." Here's a look at the second card I made with my Uncle Ghost. I tried to make it look kind of like the old house that they live in, so I used more pattern paper from my collection. I used the Galactic paper pack and the Victorian Christmas paper pack for them, and I had a fun sentiment from the stamp set as well. Here are some final looks at how my flip card turned out. Let me know what you think of the flip card. Do you have a die, or would you attempt to just make one on your own? Leave a comment down below and let me know. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll click like, and if you're new here, I hope you'll subscribe and come back. As always, you can find everything I use down below in the description box. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Bye!